I'm very thankful to Bala and ADF for giving me this opportunity to talk to you on a topic which is very, very important, very, very crucial in the current times. Not only in the current times, I must say, from last nearly 3 decades, this issue has become very one of the major issues, distracting our attention from the major underlying social issues of our society, the major issues related to employment, farmer suicide, the pattern of health, the pattern of education, all those issues have been marginalized, and the type of violence has come up, particularly against the religious minorities. As you must have seen in the teaser, the makers have very nicely brought out how Hindus were persecuted in Kashmir, how Sikhs were persecuted and killed in Delhi, 1984, Hindus in Kashmir in 1990. And after that, we see a whole series of violence. Anti-Christian violence actually appears in 1990s. But before that, anti-Muslim violence in India begins in 1961. Now, the first thing I ask myself, when these people are killed, they are killed for their faith, they are killed for their religion. Just think about it. Think about it. Most of the people who are persecuted, killed, tortured, raped, maimed, and done to subjected to all sort of atrocities are done purely because of their religious identity. Before I go further, I must say religion is a big umbrella which covers multiple aspects of our life, but the central aspect of religion to me is the moral values. Moral values which teach me how I relate to my neighbor, how I relate to my society, irrespective of the religious differences. Now, this violence against Sikhs, violence against Hindus, I'm partly keeping aside. They are not important, they are important. But if you see, persecution of Hindus in Kashmir was a phenomenon which has multiple factors which are beyond control of one country. There is a role of Pakistan, there is a role of global powers, there is a role of ethnicity, etc., etc. And Kashmir is taking a different shape as such. Now, six I am keeping aside because 1984 was a one go event. No, fortunately, it has not repeated, and I hope it will not repeat again because it was related to some local factors. But violence against Muslims, violence against Christians, this is a phenomenon which is repeating itself in the more intensifying forms. And this violence, of course, I must say, I personally believe that naturally, we tend to love the society. Naturally, we tend to love our neighbors. And this violence is the outcome of hatred. Hatred in turn is not natural. This hatred, because of which religious minorities are killed, targeted, and maimed, that has been manufactured in Indian society. Now, I am not going to talk about what is happening to Christians and Hindus in Pakistan, what is happening to Buddhists and Hindus in Bangladesh, what is happening to Muslims and Christians in Sri Lanka, because most of the post-colonial states, because of multiple factors, religious minorities are facing different type of problems. I'll restrict myself to India. That's where our primary ground of work should be. And in India, this killing of Muslim minority, I must tell you, it is called uh, Hindu Muslim violence. It did begin as a Hindu Muslim violence in the colonial era, but it is no more Hindu Muslim violence. To me, it's a targeted anti Muslim violence. Please note that fact. And secondly, the Christian violence, violence against Christians, it began itself as anti Christian violence. By and large, they tried to project that it is Hindus on one side, Christians on the other, but by and large, that violence has been a anti-Christian violence. Some few examples I'll give you just for the sake of coming to making some broad statistics. In India, many researchers have done their job very brilliantly. They have tried to analyze the data. They have tried to analyze the earlier investigation reports. Now, of course, I won't trust that much the later investigation reports which are coming in last 5 years, 7 years. I hope you can guess the reasons. But in 1998, Tista Setalwad, one of the foremost fighters against injustices, against minorities, one of the foremost soldiers of the Indian Constitution, in her one of the articles in 1998 March Communalism Combat, she points out that after studying, I mean, 7 or 8 inquiry commission reports, which were official, she points out that most of these inquiry commission reports tell us that behind this particular violence, there was a particular organization which was associated with Hindu nationalist organizations. Now, to be very frank about it, of course, some offshoot of RSS or some offshoot related directly or indirectly of that. Then, of course, later data also. Before I come to the anti-Christian violence, later data also I'll tell you that Dr. Vibhuti Narayan Rai, one of the who was the DIGs of Uttar Pradesh at some time, he also did a good deal of research. And one of the major research of his was that in most of the communal violence, which is called Hindu-Muslim violence, in which the 80 to 90% of the victims are Muslims. And you know, the percentage of Muslims in Indian population is 14.2 according to the 2011 census. So around 14.2% in the population and 80 to 90% in the as victims of the communal violence. Another thing I want to point out about the anti Muslim violence is that in 2006, Justice Sector Committee report told us that the representation of Muslims in jails is much higher, and their representation in the jobs and other social benefits is much lower. So this is one. Now the second thing which I want to point out about anti-Muslim violence is that it begins in the colonial period. It begins in the colonial period. Why? I hope you all recall this 1857 revolution, revolt, uprising, whatever you call it. And in that, the beginning of 1857 violence was done by Mangal Pandey. 1857 violence was led by Bahadur Shah Zafar. Bahadur Shah Zafar had associates Tata Saheb Tope, Nana Saheb Peshwa, Jhansi Ki Rani. Hindu Muslims came together, the peasants came together, and they fought against the British rule. The British rule got shaken, and that time they decided that if we have to rule in this country, we have to pursue the policy of divide and rule. Accordingly, they introduced communal historiography in Indian history books. What is communal historiography? Communal historiography means to present the rule of kings through the eyes of their religion. I understand, I believe from rational angle, most of the kings were ruling for power and wealth. Most of the kings were trying to expand their kingdom. It was not for the sake of morality of religions. But British historiography presented, which is a foundation of India's popular understanding of history, that came in, and there top mostly the Muslim kings were targeted. The first question is that Muslim kings were targeted. What have the Muslim kings to do with today's Muslims? But again, that association was made that this is all Muslims. Please note, no community is a uniform community. So what was spread against Muslim kings and in turn against the Muslim was that Muslims are aggressors, they were foreigners. I must tell you, the concept of nation state is a modern one. Earlier there were kingdoms. Kingdoms' boundaries were decided by the strength of the power of the king, etc. etc. Now anyway, so two things got rooted in popular psyche. And these two things were that Muslims are temple destroyers, that Muslims imposed Islam by force in India. So this is the foundation on which hatred against Muslims was built up during colonial period. Later on, communal organizations came up, Hindu Mahasabha, RSS. They went on expanding this, and today I'm sure there is a long list of charge sheet against Muslim kings, Muslims in general, Muslims in our neighborhood, to the extent that even when Corona spreads in India, the people who are held responsible are Muslims. Fantastic. Before Tablighi Jamaat event, there is Trump Sahib coming to Ahmedabad. Namaste Trump. There is a Kanika Kapoor. There is a Sikh preacher. There are so many people coming and going. Nobody is blamed. But Tablighi Jamaat and thereby the Muslims are blamed for this. So just to sum up about this anti-Muslim violence, recently there was a study from Yale University that the communal violence is not a spontaneous one. It is made to appear the spontaneous one, but it is a orchestrated one. Point number one. Number two, this after the communal violence, in that area where the violence takes place, by and large, one party becomes more powerful electorally, and I hope you can guess the name of that party, which is ruling currently also and managing or mismanaging the whole things which are going on. Number one, my biases may be clear, but I can't help that. So this anti-Muslim violence, it has served to polarize the mass of some Hindus. And its basic point of a communal violence is that to show the threat of a small minority to the majority. The success of communal forces lies here. They are able to project in such a way that this small minuscule minority is a threat to the majority. So this Yale University study, and with that I must say that Indian Muslims, their by and large background has been from the poor Dalits. As Swami Vivekananda in his collected works published in 1979, volume 3 tells us that it is wrong to say that Islam spread on the strength of the soul. To escape the tyranny of caste system, many people embraced Islam, and so that's why where we see that this anti-Muslim violence has been spectacular, eye-catching, repeating one after the other. And of course, I woke up to this when I was living in Bombay, and after Babri demolition, which again is a long story, I'm not going into that. After Babri demolition, I witnessed there that nearly 1,000 Muslims got killed and 10,000 crores of property was done, destroyed, put to fire, and mostly belonging to the Muslims. And after that, we saw Muzaffarnagar, where on the issue of love jihad, very interesting phenomenon. Many even Catholics believe that there is something like love jihad, which is of course a totally unbelievable thing. Love jihad, and lately, of course, this one humorous thing I will tell you before I come to the anti-Christian violence. Listen, in last 6 years, there is a new phenomenon which came up to the forefront, was that of lynching, and with that, nearly 90 Muslims got killed, and many Dalits got killed. Many Dalits face a flogging. So here, this issue I will why I'm taking in detail, why they were interested in cow. Do you think they're interested in the welfare of cow? I don't believe so. I know that in the BJP ruled states where the cow sheds are set up, there hundreds of cows have died in Hingonia and many other places because of lack of nutrition and proper care. The key, of course, lies in Buddhism, Brahminism struggle, Brahminism taking up cow as its symbol, and of course, in Vedic period, beef was eaten, cows were sacrificed. Gautam Buddha started it. Gautam Buddha wanted non-violence, etc., etc. That's a long story. But what I want to tell you, some humorous fact is that when I saw that people are being killed in the name of cow, I tried to investigate it, and I came across a book, a biography on one of our ex-prime ministers. I hope you can guess the name. He used to write poetry also. I hope you got the name, Atal Bihari Vajpayee. His biography is there. Haar Nahi Manunga by Vijay Trivedi, page 236. Vijay Trivedi Saab tells us that when Atalji was on a US lecture tour, after the lecture in US, they were served the meals. He was eating, enjoying the meals, and his neighbor told him, "Hello, what you are eating is beef." Atalji had no problem. He gave a wide smile and said, "So what is the problem? I'm eating beef, but this is not of Indian cow. This is of American cow." Fantastic. So this is another science which has come up in the late year, where cow products are supposed to be curing cancer, doing that, and that is again ideological construct. As far as violence is concerned, this violence has pushed large section of Muslim community into ghettos. And lately what is happening is that they are being relegated to the second class citizenship, as the original second Sarasangh Chalak of RSS, MS Golwalkar, said that Muslims, Christians, and communists, they are the threat to our nation, and if they have to live here, they have to live at the mercy of the majority. So what they want to achieve through this communal violence is to subdue the community, to relegate them to margins. Now this is part one. Part two, when I come to anti-Christian violence, please note that anti-Christian violence picks up in the decade of 1990s, 1980s. But that time it is not visible. It becomes most glaringly visible with the murder of Pastor Graham Stewart Staines in the night of 23rd January 1999. That was very glaring phenomenon. Whole globe's attention was attracted, and after that, one came to know that anti-Christian violence in Orissa, in Dang, in Jhabua, and all that Adivasi belt. Primarily, it began in the Adivasi areas. In Adivasi areas, where Christian missions are working mainly for health and education of the poor Adivasis, leading to the empowerment of the Adivasis. Thereby, the rulers of the Adivasis, those who are trying to exploit them, feel threatened, and it is through that probably hope you can understand the basic correlation. As such, the propaganda is one of the UN rapporteurs. Once I happened to meet him, he told me that in India, the dominant thinking is that Muslims are terrorists and Christians are converters. Christians are converters. I tried to give a thought to it, because by now, anti-Christian violence after Pastor Graham Stein's murder, after Kandhamal violence, it has taken a different form. It is not as spectacular as Gujarat or Muzaffarnagar or Mumbai. It is scattered because its focus is mainly in the poor Adivasi areas. It is scattered, it is subtle, and it is generally an attack on prayer meetings which go on. Now, here, see the thing, how hate is manufactured. I believe violence cannot take place without manufacture of hate. And how hate has been manufactured against these Christians working in the interior area, that they are converting. Now, I want to ask you, you know better than me, but Indian Christian community is older than the American Christian community. St. Thomas is supposed to have landed up on Malabar coast on AD 52. Since then, there has been a spread. And what is the percentage of Christians today? It is 2.3%. 1950 years of work by Christian missionaries, and today Christians are 2.3%. Now, again, I'm not going into details of that. If you want to go to the depth of this, please note that in 1971, the percentage of Indian Christians according to the population census was 2.6%, and today it is 2.3%. In the last 6 decades, it has come down by 0.3%, and people believe Christians convert, etc., etc. But the popular perceptions are so created that these people who are the victims of communal violence, this is what you have to put your brains here, that victims are shown to be the culprits, that they have done something against our religion, Because of that, this particular act is taking place. I must tell one personal anecdote that when Kandaman violence was going on, I went there for investigation, for trying to talk to people, etc., etc. Once, of course, for going to Kandhamal, one has to go via Bhubaneswar. And when in Kandhamal, I used to see the plight of Christians in refugee camps, no protection during cold, hundreds of churches destroyed, close to 100 Christians died. That time when it happened, on the cities of Bhubaneswar, people believe that whatever has happened is good. They need to be treated like this because they are a threat to our religion. Please note, 2.3% of Christians have been popularized to be the threat to 80% of people who are supposed to be, who are the followers of Hindu faith. So basically, this violence is not a religious phenomenon. This is a political phenomenon. And the political phenomenon is that of the communal forces which want to polarize the society along the religious lines and bring back the values of earlier times. This last point may not be very direct, but let's understand what is the agenda of the communal forces. Communal forces basically, if very simply I want to explain it, that on one side are the people for Indian nationalism like Bhagat Singh, Gandhi, Ambedkar. On other side are the people who are communal, who want a Hindu nation in India, Muslim nation in Pakistan, Christian nation probably in America or some other place. So I am not here against one religion for another religion. The fight is not between religions. Fight is between the pre-democratic values of caste and gender hierarchy versus the values of liberty, equality, fraternity of a democracy. So that's what last example I'll give you, and that is between for Indian nationalism. I take up the example of Bhimrao Babasaheb Ambedkar. You may be knowing he launched a lot of struggles for eradication of caste, for social justice, for annihilation of caste, and same Ambedkar went on to burn Manusmriti. While burning Manusmriti, he said, Manusmriti gives the provisions of slavery of women and Shudras. I don't accept it, so I am burning this book. Same Ambedkar went on to become the chief architect of Indian constitution. So this is what Indian national values are there. This is what Indian constitution is there. This is what Indian democracy should be standing for. On the other side, there is a person called K. Sudarshan, who was the Sarasangachalak chief of RSS. And in 2000, he gave a statement that Indian constitution is based on the Western values. Throw it away and bring back the values from from holy Indian books. And which book he is hinting at? He is hinting at Manusmriti. So it is not a struggle between Hindus and Muslims. It is not a struggle between Hindu and Christian. The communal forces want to bring back the older values of birth-based inequality. And in this, the targets are people, Muslims and Christians who are targeted for their faith, for their belief, for their religion. So this is where I think campaigns which ADF is launching, about which Bala said in the beginning, campaigns like this, what we have to do. Of course, the practical details Bala will be giving, ADF will be giving you. But I feel that if we want to protect, it is not a question that Christians separately can protect themselves, Muslims separately can protect themselves. No, it is a protection of India's constitutional values. It's a protection of India's democracy, which will protect all of us, which will protect the weaker sections of society. So apart from the legal steps, of course, legal steps are the most important than the initial part of it. What I feel is important is spreading the awareness in the people. The misconception, because see, my model is this, that misconceptions are deliberately spread against Muslims and Christians. Because of these misconceptions, there is a hatred Because of this hatred, some people can get the violence instigated, and after the violence, they become politically more powerful. So, in the same way, while we act at one level, at legal level, at another level, we have to see that the misconceptions against Muslims, misconceptions against Christians, which are prevalent in the society, they have to be countered by a rational, loving, humane explanation of the attitude of these communities. Number one. Number two, communal politics has raised the walls of hatred between different communities. We have to demolish these walls of hatred and promote the bridges of love. Whole of Indian culture is full of Hindu-Muslim interaction, Hindu-Christian interaction, and a celebratory atmosphere between different religious communities. We have to revive that. We have to bring that into a popular life. This can be done through talks, discussions, YouTube videos, booklets, seminars. Now, of course, seminars will be out probably, webinars amongst the community, and inter-community celebrations. Like festivals have two parts. One is religious, another is social. Religious part the community can do, but the social part has to be done together with people of other religious communities. At the same time, strengthening human rights movement and all those people who are standing for human rights of weaker sections of society, we have to associate with them, because ultimately communal politics, which targets one community after the other, its basic aim is to abolish the rights of consent, abolish the democratic values. So these are the multiple steps which we have to think about it. And friends like you who are committed to social betterment, who are committed to a better society, who are committed to democracy, who are committed to values of Indian Constitution, it is time that we come and we start preparing for 22nd August, which is the day where the persecution of people because of religion or faith is taking place. Because this is symptom. This persecution, these killings are symptom of a different, deeper politics which is trying to entangle the whole society. So we have to do these things properly, and through this spread our word, spread our message as much as possible, so that we can hope for building a better India tomorrow. Thank you very much. Your questions will be welcome. I'll stay on till the end. Selvi, actually, this communalism primarily emerged in the North India because of various reasons. And if you see that the whole notion of Hindutva also revolves around the Aryan race, whose domination is more in the North India. Now, as far as temple destructions is concerned, now it is not in my other videos. Sorry, I'll be talking, advertising myself a bit free of cost. But in my most of the videos, I've tried to explain that temple destructions had nothing to do with the religion of the king. There is a Hindu king who destroys temple. There is a Muslim king who destroys a mosque. There is a Muslim king who gives donation to Hindu temples. There is a Muslim king who also destroys a temple. So it's a complicated story, because kings were ruling for religion. No, kings were not ruling for religion. They were ruling for power and wealth. Many times there was a lot of wealth because of which they did it. So question is here, because many of the Muslim kings and the Hindu kings, they had battles in the North India. So sometimes it is presented as if in the North India temples were destroyed and South India it was not destroyed. South India, I can tell you, there is a temple of Sri Rangapatnam which was destroyed by Maratha kings. Now, so anyway, this has got associated with Muslim kings, which is an unfortunate thing, because temple destruction is an independent phenomenon, irrespective of the religion of the king.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Just moving on quickly because of the paucity of time, Stephen Selvaraj, my good friend, he says a big thank you to you. Excellent as always, he says.
Thank
And
you.
then he says you refer to South Asia's colonial past, particularly India, perhaps alluding to the checkered experience with the West. What would your advice be to international stakeholders who have a genuine interest to ensure that in India to protect and promote freedom of religion? How should they circumvent this colonial tag and yet be effective in their advocacy in India?
See, history is not static. During colonial period, what happened? They did not abolish landlordism. So in India and some post-colonial states, on one side, the newer classes of industrialists, businessmen, educated classes came up on one side. On the other side, the older ruling classes continued with depleted powers. And it is from depleted powers that communal politics comes up. Now today, of course, globally, if they see we are developing United Nations norms of human rights, preservation of minority rights, etc., etc. So today, I think global stake wise, it is a question of human rights. It's a question of UN charters. It's a question of UN covenants which talk about freedom of religion, which in a way India is a signatory to them. So international stakes are like this. Obviously, if your neighbor's house is disturbed because of disturbances, you can't live peacefully, and world is gradually turning into a global village. So international stakes are very simple. That one is that it's a question of human rights, which is a part of our United Nations mandate. It's a question of India's constitution's values also. And thirdly, I must say the most important thing is that no country can progress unless it goes on the values of amity and harmony. Wherever the emotive issues which create emotional conflicts, emotional divides, that country has no future as far as development is concerned. And that's why you see during last couple of decades, our major attention has been temple, cow, love jihad, ghar wapsi, etc., etc. And in the initial part of the republic, when Nehru was very clear that country means industries, country means universities, country means in irrigation, country means new jobs, country means abolition of weakening of the caste system, country means empowerment of the women, all that. So those things have taken a back seat. Now, as far as international stakes are concerned, many reports keep coming which document the violation of human rights and religious freedom in our country. So in that sense, that to have a peaceful world, international powers should have a lot of stake, and they should definitely think of steps whereby in the post-colonial states these type of things which happen should be reprimanded or advisory should be given. Of course, obviously, outside states can't interfere in the national policies, they should not, but their opinion should be mandatory, and how they promote the victims of, how they protect the victims of such violence, if there are some provisions in the United Nations, these should be thought of. I am not very good at those norms. Probably Bala himself may be much better because he's an advocate. But I think global community has the responsibility in ensuring freedom of religion everywhere. What can be the mechanisms? Like in Geneva, I think there is an International Court of Justice. There are other places who also come out with a report on the freedom of religion. They do the ranking of the countries also, which the countries don't take seriously and carry on with their own merrily violating all that. So it's a difficult question. It is a tough task, but I think United Nations should evolve norms whereby protection, freedom of religion, and thereby dignity of people all over the world is upheld, respected, and promoted.
Thank you, sir. Another question from Hulda Fahmi. One important aspect that she asks is about the anti-conversion laws and the anti-cow slaughter laws. What role do they play in mob violence against Muslims and Christians?
See, sorry, just I reminded one thing. I am very fond of self-advertisement. So one thing I must tell, which was to Bala's point, in your website you have good number of this thing. Recently, I uploaded a video in English, I think 25-minute video on anti-Christian violence on my YouTube channel. This Dr. Ram Puniani. So that anti-Christian violence video we have recently loaded, probably uploaded. You can just see. Now, as far as these laws are concerned, now these laws actually are the starting point for giving ammunition to those who want to suppress minorities. Number one, if a honest scrutiny is done, many of these laws may not stand the scrutiny of Indian constitution's values. That is my feeling, but others can confirm. Number two, they actually, many of these laws have come because of the pressure of the communal forces. At the time of independence, they were not there. In the initial part of constitution, most of them were not there. In the initial part, for example, about cow this thing, it was just said as a directive principle that cows should be protected from biological ground of to preserve its progeny. Nothing more was done. Nothing more was written. Gradually, because of the pressure of communal forces which are becoming dominant and dominant because of our lethargy, our failure to combat them, these laws are coming up, and they are giving some sort of legitimacy, false legitimacy, to actions against religious minorities. It may be related to love jihad. It may be particularly related to cow. Uh, those Number one, they come because of the pressure of the communal forces. Number two, in turn, when they come, they are abused, misused, again to harass the religious minorities.
Thank you, sir. Even as we have come to the last 4 minutes, Tamina Arora, director of ADF India, asked a question. She's like, how do we balance the spread of misinformation? Probably reading a little bit, I would like to add here, including incitement to violence. How do we balance the spread of misinformation and amid concerns about censorship? So, how do we balance the two?
See, friends, actually, I must appreciate ADF that you have been regularly conducting programs where this disinformation is combated, partly because I have been so closely associated with you. I know that. I only feel that those efforts are bit on the lower side. We need to create many young people trained, understanding the India's culture, pluralism, humanism, morality of religion, and the agenda of communal politics, which is there. We need to raise a whole vast series of young people who are trained in this and who commit themselves to spread these values in the society. That is number one. Number two, we do need to encourage these young boys and girls to start their own WhatsApp groups, to be active in the social media, because BJP has started IT cell spending massive amount of money, paying massive amount of money to spread hatred. We have to create voluntary social media intervention whereby we encourage the positive values of dignity and love. And that, I think, I appreciate. While I appreciate ADF's work, I hope many other organizations come up to supplement this and intensify this area of our work, because this is a foundational work. As we say, short term, long term. Legal steps are immediate must. We have to protect the victims. Then, in the long term, when we want to combat this communal violence, we have to create a narrative, a narrative which is national, which is humane, and that narrative, I think, begins from the plural traditions of India. That narrative peaks with the freedom movement values of Gandhi on one side, Annie Besant on the other, Maulana Azad on the third, and Sardar Baldev Singh. Those narratives have to be made the part of social common sense. We are lagging far behind in this struggle of making our narrative as a significant narrative in social memory. And that's where I think we need to also commit our energies.
She wants to ask that how do we react to the violence, the police atrocity that we hear about in Thuthukudi, in Tamil Nadu, which we heard, yeah,
Mm.
Jairaj and Benix. Should we, is there a trap in thinking of this as, and this is my addition here, in how do we respond to that? Is there a trap in seeing it as a targeting of, a particular religious minority, or is it really to be seen that way? Sir?
I think, see, the overall the attitude of police has been very brutal, to put it. That's the understatement, I think. So it may not be purely a anti-minority act, but of course, biases. Most of our police force is victim of the biases against Muslims and Christians. That I concede right away. But in addition, the police force has its own way of where human rights are disregarded. They look at human rights ideas with contempt. That's what is my broad understanding about the attitude of the authorities towards this. And as this police force and other those in power, they do have inbuilt biases against Muslims and Christians, those two particular communities. So I mean, these are inseparable. In Hindi, there is a this thing, Karela upar se neem chada, means basically they have biases, and when they get occasion, that gets manifested in such brutal forms.